afternoon. Thank you for being here. We are excited to announce that we have caucused in our Assembly Republican majority, and we have come together with a plan as to how we are going to continue to have great schools in Wisconsin. I'm going to start by turning it over to Representatives Ballwig and Thiesfeld, and then we'll go through the balance of our discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and colleagues who are here today to talk about the education plan that we're putting together in the Assembly caucus. One of the things that Representative Thiesfeld and I want to talk about is that we do have experienced educators, people that have been in the trenches over the years. I started out my career as an elementary education teacher, licensed from K to 8 back in those days, but spent most of my time teaching first grade. I know when I graduated from college, my aunt asked me why I was going to be teaching first grade, because I was smarter than that. I could teach older kids. I said, there's nothing I would enjoy more than teaching kids how to read. Having that ability to build that foundation so that they know how to be lifetime learners. I know what it's like to help students who are struggling, how to try to communicate with their parents, what the importance is of preparing them well at home to be able to learn on a daily basis, from doing those timetables and to learning those simple words and trying to figure out the ways that students learn best. So I appreciate the work that our budget committee that we're putting together to make sure that kids at all levels and at all abilities have the appropriate background and the appropriate funding levels. We do really appreciate what it is on a daily basis for those teachers to go in and to face those challenges with kids who are ready to learn and kids who maybe aren't so ready to learn, and the school board members and instructors and staff that make sure that they have the tools that they need. And so I think this budget that we're proposing is going to accomplish that. So Representative Thiesfeld.
I'm Representative Jeremy Thiesfeld, and I am the chair of the Assembly Education Committee. And as many of you probably already know, I have, before I got into the legislature, over 20 years of experience ranging from ages 4th grade all the way through high school in educating young minds in the state of Wisconsin and a little bit in Minnesota, actually. One of the greatest joys of my life were those years spent in a classroom being able to shape and mold young minds. And one of the great rewards, I think, that any teacher will tell you, especially if you've been in it for a number of years, is you get to see these kids turn into great functioning citizens in our state, in our nation, who are able to go out and share in the public discourse, take positions in our local communities of service, start up companies, provide jobs for everybody. And that is really the focus of what we want to do in education in the state, is provide people for the workforce and also pass the keys of freedom on to the next generation. Our schools are doing that, and one of the reasons we are able to do that effectively is because of the investment that we have put in our children, because, as you've oftentimes heard, children are our future, and that is about as true a statement as you can possibly make. And so we're going to share with you some details here that we have come to an agreement on in the Assembly about how we're going to continue the large investment in education through the budgetary process here that we're going through right now. So thank you for your time, and who is coming up next? Speaker Vos. Oh, I need that sheet.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to thank both of my colleagues and all of the folks around Wisconsin who do one of the most important jobs that there is, and that's to make sure that we have well-educated and good citizens going forward. So thank you to all the teachers, the administrators, everybody who's involved in education all across the state. You know, when we started this budget process, we made a few things very clear that we wanted to set down as important markers. We have said consistently that we are not going to raise the income or sales tax, and we are never going to expand welfare, especially in an economy where we have more jobs all across the state than we have people to fill them. This budget shows clearly that we can live within our means and that we can build on last session's historic investment in K-12 education. If we look where we were at the beginning of the session, the members who are here with us in the Assembly Republican Caucus, if you recall, we sent a letter to Governor Evers saying there are a wide variety of things that we believe are good for the state and also have the ability to generate bipartisan support. One of the most important aspects was 2/3 funding of our K-12 education system. If you remember, that was put into place by Republicans under Governor Tommy Thompson. The 2/3 requirement was eliminated by Governor Doyle, and I am proud to say that today, with the investments that we are planning to make, we will again reach 2/3 funding provided by the state, with the balance provided by the state and by the local and federal government. We know we can deliver on that promise because of the fantastic economy that we are in and the fact that we have a large budget surplus. The most important thing that we do inside of our budget and the largest expenditure that we make is funding our K-12 education system. And to talk about some of the details, I'm going to turn it over to Chairman Nygren, who will detail the plan that the Assembly Republicans have crafted and are ready to announce.
Thank you, Speaker Vos, and I appreciate hearing from two people who have actually experienced the classroom. The comments made by my colleagues are quite consistent with the conversations I have with my wife on a regular basis, who is a public school teacher. And I think the timing of this announcement is relevant as well. Personally, for the Nygren family, I can tell you last week we celebrated the graduation of Callie from UWGB in 3 years. And this weekend, I'm going to be celebrating the graduation of Colin from Marinette High School. Both of these kids have been provided a quality education by the taxpayers in the state of Wisconsin. One of our major objectives over the last several years is identifying where we have some gaps, where we have some weaknesses. And one of those weaknesses historically has been all was not equal throughout the state when it came to funding opportunities based on the funding formula and the way it was locked in the past. We took steps towards addressing that last session so that a child, doesn't matter what zip code you're in, that you actually get a quality education where you can go on and succeed. This budget continues that direction. This budget will have over $12 billion in state support for public schools. It will have a 200 per pupil in the first year and 204 per pupil in the second year. That's a 604 pupil per biennium, over the biennium increase in per pupil funding. 13% increase in state funding for special education, which is the first increase in more than a decade. Over $20 million increase in funding for student mental health. We will fully fund high-cost transportation aid, and we will target resources to rural districts. Having done all that, and many other things that will be mentioned when we go to Joint Finance tomorrow, we will still be able to say that our property taxes will be lower with this proposal than the one Governor Evers put forward. Money is directed at the classroom where it's most impactful. It makes the largest difference on our kids, rather than just shifting money from one pot to the other, as the Evers proposal had done. At this point in time, I'd like to call on one of my other colleagues from Joint Finance Committee who will discuss more in detail some of the other investments. Representative Laudenbeck.
Good afternoon. As the Vice Chair of the Joint Committee on Finance, I had the opportunity to travel with the committee across the state of Wisconsin, and I also had the opportunity to do listening sessions in my district and to accompany other members from our caucus and visit with their district and talk to their constituents. My district, I have kind of the bookends of the state funding formula. My district covers Beloit, and then it goes into Williams Bay and other communities in Walworth County, and kind of everything in between. So for me, I think that this budget does a great job of understanding that each district's needs are different and that the formula tries to address those needs, but certain areas we have either lost pace, such as in the case of special education reimbursement. So we know high-cost special ed, which is a student with expenses over $30,000, already gets reimbursed at 90%. So for all the other students, there has been an increased demand for those services, and the funding that the appropriation that funds those services has remained relatively flat. So that has meant over time a decline in the reimbursement rates for schools. And so we heard across the state that schools, that they need paraprofessionals in the classroom. They need maybe some one-on-one. They may need adaptive equipment. We want to make sure that those schools with students with an IEP receive an increase in their reimbursement rate going forward into the next biennium. We also heard from schools, again, something that the funding formula maybe never contemplated, but that have some mental health needs that may be best addressed in a school-based setting. Certainly, the healthcare profession and other outside services are still going to be part of healthy kids and raising healthy kids, but sometimes early identification in the school can be the important step that children need to get the services that they need. So if you've got something going on at home, if you have an addiction problem in your family, maybe you just have busy parents and they both work and they just don't notice how you behave during the day because your teacher spends so much time with you. We want to be able to have schools that have students that need a referral for services to be able to have the resources to provide those services at their disposal. So this proposal will build on what we did last session and provide more resources for those schools. And those were two of the probably top 5 or 6 things that we heard as we traveled the state, and I'm really proud that we were able to prioritize those items in our assembly, in our GOP proposal. So thank you. Representative Mary Falskowski will make some remarks on rural school supports.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for being here. A little trip down memory lane. When we first got elected in the last 8 years, under the guidance of Speaker Vos, we had the Rural Schools Task Force, which allowed us to really learn what was the challenges that were maybe unique to some of the rural schools, and how can they be more effective in keeping up with some of the urban schools that maybe have more amenities and different things within them. And I'm proud to say, on top of that, we then did the Urban Schools Task Force. And so we have a real good, clear understanding of unique challenges in both areas. This is an amazing budget. A very wise man said one time, education is a great equalizer. No matter what your humble beginnings could be or your wealthy beginnings could be, with an education, it can take you anywhere you want to go, especially in the United States. So whether you're from Mercer, Wisconsin, whether you're from MPS, whether you're from Shorewood, Lake Geneva, or all the school districts around the state, our goal was to make sure that your education and your opportunities were very equal, and this budget builds on this. Some of the challenges faced by rural schools are their high-cost transportation. Some districts spend upwards of $1,000 to get each student into the door every day. So that is money coming out of the classroom. We have addressed it in the last 3 budgets. We're addressing it in this budget again. We're continuing down that path to make sure the resources are still there for the rural schools. The money that is being put in there is a huge advantage to our school districts. In addition to that, we're also dealing with the low revenue issue. We addressed it last session, and we're addressing it again this session, so that a school district in Tomahawk is not competing against a school district maybe 20 miles away that's levying at a much higher rate. This levels that playing field, which allows all districts to hire the quality teachers and offer the courses that they really need. So again, I want to say thank you for coming out today, and I'd like to introduce Speaker Robin Vos again.
All right. I'm going to take my
Sorry, Robin.
It's okay, no problem. So we know that we are just at the beginning of the process. I think the Finance Committee has done a very good job if you look at the individual items they've been taking up. More money for making sure we can promote tourism so that people come and spend money in our state, making sure we address the huge issue with our prison system and ensuring that we have the ability to attract and retain the high-quality folks who are able to make sure our prisons are operated in a great way. And today, I am very confident that we have a package that will be able to go to the Joint Finance Committee on Thursday and hopefully be adopted, and then we move on to the remaining parts of the budget. So I want to applaud my colleagues here. We had a really good discussion inside of our caucus. We've had good discussions with our Senate colleagues. I think we are very close to a final agreement, but I am very optimistic that we will continue to show that Wisconsin cares about our schools, and this budget prioritizes them as one of the top items that we actually are spending our money on. So with that, I'm happy to answer some questions. Okay, I'll start here and I'll just work my way down.
Can you clarify the special education? You said it's a 13% increase. Is that a rate, 13% rate increase, or 13% in total special education funding?
It's a 13% increase in total dollars.
So what will be the rate, the reimbursement rate?
Nathan, what's the number?
About 28%.
28?
Yeah. So it's about a 13% increase in the total amount that we're spending on the program.
$50 million.
What's the total price tag of the entire package?
The total price tag is in the neighborhood of $500 million.
Right, state, at the state, plus you have the obvious local effort.
And so if we were going to do an apples-to-apples comparison with your budget to the governor's, this is $1.4 billion, and your number total is $500 million?
I think that's accurate. I'm not sure that you can actually compare them apples to apples. As I said, even on the special ed conversation, oftentimes it's just shifting from one pot of money to the other. So that has to be taken into consideration. And I read with great interest the story yesterday where even a local education leader questioned whether the 1.4 to 1.6, depending on how you look at it, was actually realistic. I think the conversation was more educators looking for a sustainable growth in reliable resources going into the future.
And let's just remember that while that number might be what the Fiscal Bureau would score it at, the dollars are generated by taking away property tax relief and putting them into the formula. So the total amount of money that goes into the classroom, I think, is greater or no less than what Governor Evers actually proposed. He just proposes a bunch of shifting of dollars between school districts and between property tax relief and spending. So what we're focusing on is not kind of a new shell game. We are focused on making sure that dollars go into the classroom. And today, as Chairman Nygren said, we are making a historic investment in education. This will be the highest level of investment that we have ever made in our public schools in the history of Wisconsin. And that is something that we hope will generate broad bipartisan support and not focus kind of on the details of what only a green eye-shaded accountant could look at, which is trying to move between the funds without looking at the direct impact of how it affects children.
So the $200 and the $204 increase, that is per pupil categorical, Dave, not a revenue limit adjustment?
It's a revenue limit adjustment.
Okay.
So the total amount that we're going to be spending will be the
State
highest
and-
in our state's history.
Right.
The approximate number, and we're waiting for the final fiscal bureau numbers, we'll have those tomorrow, but when you add the amount of local effort and state effort, we believe it will be close to, but we don't want to say that yet until we get the final fiscal bureau number.
When you talk to the governor about this, what was his reaction?
I don't want to speak for Governor Evers, but obviously knowing that we both want to make sure that we have good, vibrant schools in our state, I hope he would look and say, just like the last budget that he presented. If you remember, the last budget that we adopted, he said it was kid-friendly. We had people from all across the state who work in education saying it was a really good budget for education. This one we think does even better. So obviously, if the last budget was kid-friendly, this is like kid-friendly plus.
For the low revenue adjustment, what figures did you go with? How far up did you go?
Actually, I believe it's a similar proposal as Governor Evers had in his budget, $9,700 to $10,000.
In the first year, second?
Yeah, 97 first year, over to 10,000, I believe, over 3.
Mr. Speaker, you mentioned the postage bill in the Senate. What are kind of sticking points there? What difference between the Senate and the Senate?
Yeah, I actually think we're very close. Our staffs are going to be working through the balance of the day to make sure that we iron out the final details. We've agreed on the package. Now it's just making sure we have all the details where everyone understands the totality of the package before it's voted on. So I actually think we're really close. Sorry about that.
I think the framework is very consistent, but there could be details. You know, you got members that have, different motions, different concerns that have to be taken into consideration, but I believe the framework is very close between the Senate and the Assembly.
Is the Senate on board special ed?
I believe, once again, they're very close.
So with revenue limits, how much of that would be billed by property taxes, and how much would property tax will go up under your proposal versus Evers is like $50 and change each year?
I don't know the number off the top of my head as how much of that is, but we're looking at it as being under 1% as a property tax increase.
So you remember the goal that Republicans have always had is to minimize the impact on the local property tax. We know it's almost impossible just because fluctuations happen. One district passes a referendum, another one does a local option. So our goal has always been to keep property taxes under 1%. We believe the plan that we are offering today will basically be frozen as to where they were, because the state is going to continue to make its historic investment in education and not put the burden simply on the taxpayer.
And also point out it's considerably lower than the Governor Evers proposal. In broad dollars, my recollection, I don't have the budget in front of me, my recollection over the 2 years, we're talking about $4.6 million. My staff is shaking his head.
We can
yes.
get you the final numbers. We can get you the final numbers.
The overhaul of the funding formula that Evers has proposed that would account for poverty, that's off the table.
Correct. Yes. One of the things that was most important as we went through the Blue-Ribbon Commission, it's interesting because by and large, we gave them a very broad mandate to say, look at the funding formula, listen to folks all around the state, find out what actually has the biggest impact. I think they came to us saying that we need to do something on special education, and that by and large, the funding formula works pretty well. So that's why we are not looking for an overall uprooting of the current funding formula, but doing some tweaks to make sure that we can reflect what's really happening in Wisconsin. So as Representative Falskowski said, we know we know high needs transportation was something we heard a lot about in the course of the Blue Ribbon Commission. That's addressed in our package. We know that special needs and special education funding was really a profound part of the discussion in that Blue Ribbon Task Force. That's addressed with, I think it's a 13% increase. So we looked at the recommendations. Now, some of them are policy-based, and we are trying to minimize the amount of policy that we put inside the budget. So my hope is that outside the budget, we'll be able to bring some of their other ideas up, dealing with like declining enrollment, areas like that. But that would not necessarily be done inside the budget. It would be done as standalone legislation.
There's been this discussion about splitting the budget into two pieces, one of just the dollars, one of the language. How seriously are you looking at that as a Senate?
I can't speak for the Senate, but that is something that we are definitely looking at. We know it's been done in the past. We know that we want to find every way to work together. That's why I'm glad we had an opportunity to sit down with Governor Evers today. Hopefully we'll do it again next week. As most of you know, we had a meeting every single week with Governor Evers, kind of the same time, same day, or similar. And yeah, I'm sorry, Governor Walker. Yeah, already moved beyond. Yeah, but with Governor Walker. So I have asked since January to have that same kind of set weekly meeting. Hopefully we'll be able to get back in that habit. We had a good one today, and hopefully we'll have a good one next week. No, not necessarily. I mean, the whole point is, if you remember, appropriations have the ability to have a line item veto. Areas without an appropriation, he still has veto power, it's just not a line item. If there's not an appropriation, that's current state law and the current Constitution, right? How quickly you forget. The budget repair bill, right? Yeah, right. I don't know. You have to ask Bob Line. Yeah, then probably not. Then why'd you ask me? We already know the answer. Okay. All right. Thank you.